Welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast with Séamus Corry. This episode includes in-depth discussions on topics surrounding mental health, including experiences with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, and feelings of despair. We recognise that these subjects may be sensitive to some of you, our listeners, and we encourage you to take good self-care. Please listen at your own pace and don't hesitate to pause or seek support if needed. Thank you so much. Good morning, one and all. Welcome to the end of another week. It's Friday. It's episode 10 of Mental Health Matters. I'm your host, Séamus Corry, mental health practitioner and wellbeing consultant. And thank you for taking the time out in your busy day to listen to this episode. I also want to thank all my listeners and those who subscribe to my channel, both on Spotify and on YouTube, for your support and for your kind comments. It's always great to get comments on every episode, and please keep those coming because I love them and I really appreciate your kind comments. If you've not already subscribed or followed me, please do so on the YouTube and Spotify links, which will follow this episode. And really, you don't want to miss out on this episode today because this is episode 10, the final episode in this series. And I finish on a real high note with a wonderful individual that I got to see at a conference last year, the Zero Dots Tour Conference in Scunthorpe, to I suppose to launch the Zero Dots Tour and raise levels of awareness around suicide and suicide prevention. The person I have in front of me today is a global TEDx speaker, a founder, a consultant, a mental health advocate, and an award winner, to mention just a few of her attributes today. But as we get into today's episode, we'll find out a little bit more about who she is and what she does. But I'd like to welcome Tanya Marwaha to my podcast episode this morning. Tanya, you're very welcome to Mental Health Matters this morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for our conversation now.
Absolutely. I just said there before we started the episode that I was blown away by your presence last year at the Zero Dots Tour Conference, and I was very keen to get you on my podcast series. So I'm really grateful that you've managed to claw some time today to spend some time with us and share your own story. Tanya, for those who don't know you, and I know you, I know a little bit about you, but today is all about getting to know you a little bit better. Would you like to share with us who Tanya is and why you're on Mental Health Matters this morning?
Oh, my pleasure. So I'm Tanya Marwaha. I'm currently 23 years old, and I'm a lived experience mental health, disability, and suicide prevention speaker and advocate. My journey started when I was around as young as I can remember, but I guess the biggest kind of pivotal point was when I was around 13 years old. That's when my journey with my mental health and suicide and also disability really came at the forefront of my life. And then from that point on, that has entirely shaped who I am, what I do, and I guess why we're having this conversation here today. And all of this was born out of my own lived experience and intersectional lived experience. I always find it really hard when people say, describe yourself, because there's always so many different identities and attributes to each and every one of us. And for me, it's always a long list. I'm disabled, I'm young, I'm a female, I'm South Asian. I've got mental health conditions, I'm neurodiverse. It kind of sometimes feels like the list goes on. And I think for me, it's really about making sure that in all of the advocacy and change making work that I do, I am embedding in the holistic experience, not just that one dimensional perspective of what's going through. And I guess I struggled with my mental health. I was undiagnosed with my physical health conditions for around 7 years. So I struggled a lot also with the impact that had on my mental health. I eventually was diagnosed with anxiety and depression when I was 15, I think 15, 16 years old. I then eventually tried antidepressants, bearing in mind at this point of time, I was living with consistent chronic pain and chronic fatigue and various other symptoms that I was passed around from doctor to doctor, department to department, saying, we're not too sure, it's stress, maybe it's all in your head, maybe it's because you got your GCSEs, maybe it's because you got your A levels. And that was basically 7 years of my life. At that time, I was struggling with my mental health. I was, you know, under the care of mental health services, therapy, antidepressants, and no one ever thought to link the two together. Everything was always seen in isolation. And I saw private doctors, I saw NHS doctors, I kind of went through it all. And then eventually at 19 years old, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is a complex chronic pain condition, and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. And at that point, I thought that that would be the answer, that would fix everything. Life would become so much easier because there's now a name to it. I can explain it. But one thing I didn't anticipate is that it doesn't mean that all of the challenges are going to go. And unfortunately, that I wouldn't get the support that I need. Bearing in mind, I was diagnosed when I was 19 or 18, turning 19 that year. I've been on a pain management waiting list since beginning of 2020.
Oh my.
Um, so you get to a point where you just start having to think, okay, this is just the cards I've been dealt with. Let me just handle this by myself. And I guess after that point of diagnosis, the point that I thought was going to be this like liberating, beautiful moment that kind of makes up for the last 7 years, my mental health got really, really bad. And I had, I attempted on my life. That wasn't the first time. The first time I actually attempted on my life was when I was 13 years old. So at that point, it had been years and years of crying for help, not just for my physical health, but for my mental health. Coming from the background that I come from as a South Asian, you know, I felt like there was so much weight on my shoulders. I couldn't let this compromise my education. I couldn't let this compromise our reputation. I felt so much shame around all of this that I kept a lot of this to myself. Mental health and emotions and feelings aren't really something we really talk about in our community. And also, I felt like I was already at a disadvantage because of my physical health, because once again, disabilities are highly stigmatized within our community traditionally. So I was like, I can't add another thing onto this. Let me just try and kind of keep this to myself for as long as possible. And at that time, when I was 19 and I had my most recent suicide attempt, it was also my first year of university. And it was just the time when lockdown had started.
Oh,
So at that time, I was 18 years old, turning 19 that year. I'd been at university for, I think, 3 or 4 months. I literally just had one term. I was studying international relations and Mandarin. So I was planning to go to China. I had flights booked, accommodation booked to go to China that summer. I was then going to do my third year in China. And I guess going into university, I felt like maybe this would help my mental health. Maybe just this experience will be somewhat of a positive. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're back in your childhood bedroom, trying to learn a completely foreign language, which is Mandarin, from a beginner's level behind a computer screen. You find out that, your study abroad has been completely cancelled. You don't know how that's going to shape your degree at all. And you're struggling with your physical and your mental health. And at that time, I had my attempt, and then I got I had a conversation with the urgent mental health services, obviously looking for support. And at that time, the response I got was, well, we're speaking to you now over the phone and you seem like you're okay. Just make sure that if you feel like that again, you either call emergency services or you speak to your GP. There's nothing really we can do at this point. And that was just, for me, it just felt like I don't know what to do. Like, at what point, how much does someone need to go to prove that they need help? And even when they have done that, it's not enough. And for me, it was like a moment of deep reflection of, actually, I've been living like this for 7 years now. My entire, I guess, teenage years, childhood, as far as I can remember, has been taken by this experience. And no matter how much I've tried to resist it, I've had to keep on going. So maybe it's just going to be a case of, maybe I just have to accept this and learn how to live with this. Because if I keep trying to fight it, it's only going to get worse because that's what's happened after all of these years. So I guess it kind of came to how I say it as like a do or die moment, quite literally, of like, how am I going to kind of channel this in a way that's healthy for me and hopefully helpful for other people, and not consistently fight against it because I've tried that path already. And I think at that point, I just had so much anger and frustration and upset and disappointment compiled over the years that I just tried. I think it just became like this huge passion and drive to just do something. So I remember I was thinking, okay, what is it that I can do? I can talk about it. I can share the experiences. I know I'm not the only one. So I think after like a week, I just started to Google and YouTube videos on like how to make graphics, like, and then I started to make graphics about mental health, like trying to really shine a light on how bad the mental health situation is, especially for young people in the UK. And then I started to create graphics about like different strategies and things I do for my well-being that helps, or different resources that I found, because I thought, especially during that time, COVID, we're all scrolling on our phones and we're all seeing so much just negativity of what's going on in the world. I really want that next time someone scrolls, they see something positive or just some sort of well-being related post. So I started to do that and I started to share my story, and then lots of other young people were like, hey, this is great, can I share my story? So then it just grew into a community which is now over 2,500 young people globally. I didn't expect it to be any bigger than probably like myself and a couple of people I knew. And then we started having young people reaching out from across the world and wanting to host workshops. So we hosted workshop programs, worked with schools. And then I guess I found myself kind of consulting and doing advisory consulting for charities and organizations. And then I started freelancing in the consulting world while doing public speaking, workshops, training, whilst I was at university. And then after university, I went into the world of corporate consulting, which taught me a lot for 2 years. Definitely an experience that I think taught me a lot, not just skills wise, but a lot about my own well-being and how I plan to take that forward into the work that I do. And then last year I left and I've set up my own consultancy and continue doing the work. But yes, that's a very long summary of who I am and why I'm here.
Wow. Wow. And if you're listening to this today, you'll really appreciate, listeners, why I so wanted Tanya on this episode today, because she's so inspirational in terms of what she's done and achieved in her life. And I just want to check, Tanya, you're still only 23, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. You've packed a lot into a very short space of time, right?
Yeah, yeah, it feels like a bit of a fever dream at times.
Yeah. Where does all your energy come from, Tanya? How, where does your drive come from? I know you've spoken about the issues and terrible experience you've had with public health services. Um, you know, what drives you, Tanya?
The passion of wanting to help and ensure that others feel heard, seen, and valued. I think
Yeah.
that's been a consistent theme throughout my life. Even when I was a child, I experienced a lot of racism, and that had a great impact on my mental health. So I think I always have, in some way, whether it's been because of my mental health, my disabilities, the color of my skin, I've always felt like I haven't been heard, seen, and valued as much as others. And I think for me, that it's almost like turning that pain into something positive and making an impact. And I'll be honest with you, like over the years that I've been doing this work, my mental health has struggled quite a lot with the lack of diversity, inclusivity, and representation within the mental health, suicide prevention, disability space.
Yeah.
And it's made me at times take steps back, but I don't know. It just continues, I guess, that frustration and that wanting to see something be different is what drives me forward, because how can I just sit and wait for change to happen? I have to do what I can to make that happen.
Yeah, and sadly, that on we gain a lot from our own experiences, whether that be poor mental health, whether that be suicidal ideation, whether that be you know suicidal episodes, but equally, as I found, and I don't know if it's your experience as well, you know. medical services are too easy or too quick to just throw some medication at us and say, well, that's it. There seems to be no follow-up. There seems to be no real level of counselling. There seems to be no real level of support out there. My experience, and probably your experience as well, is there seems to be an ever-growing waiting list. There seems to be an ever-growing crisis in mental health. Further compounded, I suppose, by your own culture, in so far as you've mentioned there, that disability and mental health is heavily stigmatized in the Asian culture. Uh, does that cause you issues in your own in your own culture? You know, do people is there still a frowning upon? You know, we don't speak about that. You know, we keep that hidden. We don't talk about that. Are you up against that all the time, Tanya?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's obviously really positive developments happening within our community, and there are people talking about it and doing great work, but that's something I've accepted that I'll always have to face. It's almost like a trade-off I made. I even now still have it where if I want to post something on social media about my lived experience, I get really anxious. I hesitate. I don't post it because I'm not thinking a fear of what are people going to think or say. It's about how this might impact family who know me or people within my community who know me. What are they going to think? Are they going to start making assumptions? Are they going to think negatively of my parents, for example, or other people? I think it's that knowing how things can be can sometimes it's still a challenge I'm trying to navigate, and also making sure that things are done in a respectful way and no one feels like it's in a criticism or like
Yeah.
an attack to our culture and our community and our beliefs, because it's not. It's about understanding that these are some of the experiences some of us have and how this can act as a barrier, but also how in some ways this can be positive. But I think for me the main thing is that our mental health services aren't culturally competent enough. They don't know how to understand and support individuals with these specific cultural experiences. And I think that's the biggest lack. In the same way, when we think about mental health awareness and advocacy, when you think about who leads these conversations at a national level, they don't really include individuals who have that culturally specific experience. And that conversation is then completely left out, which means that individuals like myself don't feel like we're seen and we're heard
Mm.
in the things that are happening. I know that I completely agree. I really struggled with the fact that waiting lists were really long. It was always short-term interventions. But I think the thing that I actually really struggled with the most was that I had to hide a huge part of me when I went to therapy or I went to see a medical professional. And that huge part of me was who I am in terms of my culture, my identity, my background, how I was brought up, all of these things, because what would happen is I would then be spending the entire time trying to educate the other person. So I remember you're told, let's say you have 6 sessions of counseling. Well, the first 2 sessions are me just trying to explain and give all the cultural context. So by the time you get past that, you're just like, well, I'm exhausted. Here's another thing I've just had to do and take responsibility for. So that was really, really difficult, which is why I never really found kind of counseling or therapy very helpful until last year I managed to get a counselor who was of South Asian heritage. And I know I will say that experience was life changing, really, really life changing. And
Yeah.
in terms of her qualifications, what the style of therapy, nothing was different. The only thing that was different was that she understood all of the cultural context and she was culturally competent. And that just made, I felt like for the first time I could bring my full self there. So I think the biggest thing for me when I'm talking about how my identity and my culture intersects with these experiences, it's in a way to make sure that one, it's represented in campaigns, charity work, awareness, media, discourse, but then also to make sure that it's then embedded into the support and the services that are then out there for individuals.
And I suppose what you're alluding to then is that there's a huge need for a delivery of cultural competency training in these services to make these services aware of the barriers that they're putting up. for individuals like yourself who come from a different heritage, come from a different cultural heritage, because there will be nuances, and I being of Irish extraction, we all have our little nuances, we all have our little place, but it must be extremely frustrating for you, Tanya, to come across cultural incompetence almost on a daily basis, right? Because you'll be up against it.
Yeah, definitely frustrating, and definitely extremely impactful in on your mental health in a negative way. Um, Especially when you're already feeling like no one understands me, no one cares about me. And then when you're expecting to perhaps feel that support, you once again don't get it. And I think actually the most negative impact on my mental health has been when I've been in situations or rooms about mental health advocacy and suicide prevention work, and I've been completely invisible. I think those are the instances that have had the most negative impact, which is a shame because you would expect these spaces to be as psychologically safe as possible.
Yeah, and as inclusive as possible, and as open as possible. How do you how and I suppose it's your lifelong mission now.
Mhm.
And I suppose you've dedicated yourself to the task of improving cultural competency in the UK, if not the world. To that end, how does it happen, Tanya? What needs to happen?
So it starts with conversations. So one thing feels so uncomfortable. I've been pushing myself to feel more comfortable about highlighting the problems that we do have, the gaps that we have. I think it
Mm,
starts with conversation, and it starts with collaborative conversation, not a conversation where someone feels or a certain group feels attacked by other individuals or other groups. It's all about understanding kind of where the gaps are and what the role and responsibility that we all have to play
mm,
in ensuring that diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and representation. And then I guess moving on from that, it's about providing educational opportunities. So training, consultancy, resources, more open dialogue and conversation to then allow for this kind of information sharing, experience sharing, so everyone can learn from each other and work once again collaboratively together to make sure that the changes are made to ensure that. So I think it's kind of multiple steps, and I guess in the work that I do, it's not just kind of talking about it, sharing my experience, creating the dialogue, but then also delivering the training, the consultancy, the resources. Following up on that as well is a really big thing. You don't want anything to be a tokenistic, one-off, ad hoc event or piece of work. And then I guess the other thing for me is it's also really important to make sure that this work is led by those with that lived experience. So not just handing that information over to someone who once again doesn't have that lived experience to then deliver it. It's about making sure that lived experience expertise is embedded all throughout the work that's being done, because that's the most effective way to do it.
absolutely. And you mentioned there, obviously, the setting up of the Young Minds Charity, and you've managed globally to reach out to over 2,500 young people. And that started with your voice, right? That started when you found your voice. That must give you a real sense of achievement.
It does, but I think there's always a drive, obviously, to do more.
More.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think
Yeah.
also your voice can reach people, but it can fall to deaf ears. And I think that's one other aspect of it as well is like I don't want to just reach people and not be heard. I want to reach people and have that impact truly be made and followed
Absolutely.
through. And one thing I feel really kind of strongly about is also like my voice doesn't represent everyone else's voice. So making sure that I'm able to platform other people's voices and other people's lived experience as much as possible, because I think then what happens is sometimes I work with institutions, organizations who then see me as this mouthpiece for the entire Asian community. And I'm like, no,
No, you're
actually,
just one little
just
element
one
of it.
person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is a good first step, but let's not then put the responsibility all on one person to represent everyone's experience.
I get
So
it.
I think it's yeah, I think for me it's about how can I act as a bridge between communities, bridge those gaps, and then in an empathetic and kind and positive way, encourage that change to happen, because it's not constructive to be loud and shout all the time, and then people get defensive. It's about how do we do this in best way possible, and also just having that compassion and empathy for other people, as well as yourself.
Absolutely, and it's making sure that you're
Mm-hmm.
well enough to be able to do the work that you do, and but it's also looking after ourselves, right? And you, like me, have been there in terms of our own mental health experience, both in terms of suicidal ideation, poor mental health, anxiety, depression. We've been there, and it's making sure that we have the tools in place to help and support ourselves be the best that we can be for the people that we do represent, right? How Tanya, do you relax, and how do you relax?
Yes, I do. And I think on that point of making sure our well-being, so I try and make sure my well-being is as well looked after as possible, is also remembering that no one's expecting this from me. I'm doing this because I want to do it. And if I want to take a step back, which I have done, I don't need to be afraid to do that. I just need to listen to how my well-being's doing, because there is no point in sacrificing my well-being for this. That is just counterintuitive. So I guess how I relax, I'm very kind of like open with listening to my body and my needs. Thankfully, in the way that I work, I can make sure that I move around my working schedule and things like that. I always make sure that I don't work past a certain point, only in the evenings if I really, really feel like it. So I'll make sure once I finish at around like 4 or 5 o'clock that my evening is mine. I always have different activities like reading, watching something, spending time with friends and family. I then like to make sure that my weekends are free, if possible, to plan kind of social activities and just time for myself. And I just have to make sure that I'm not compromising those elements for work.
Yeah,
Is really important. And I think also just making sure that I'm aware of my support system for my well-being,
good.
understanding I guess what I call my warning signs, which are times when I know things that happen or things that I might feel that might signal that my mental health isn't doing that well. And my support system are also aware of that. So making sure that I'm kind of constantly checking in on that. And also just being realistic and honest with myself. Like, I'll be completely honest, my mental health has actually been quite bad this past year. I've been struggling quite a lot, and I've been getting the support that I need. And earlier this month, I was like, actually, you know what? I think I might need to try medication again. And that is okay. And that's me doing what I need to do for my mental health and well-being. So it's moving away from that expectation, that notion that I should be completely fine because I'm talking about it. But it's also like, actually, no, my mental health is fluid. It's a journey that I'm still on. And I just need to make sure that that is always at the forefront of everything that I do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And like you say, it's that continuum, right? Sometimes we're in a good space, sometimes we're not in a good space. Sometimes we need to take a step back, and it's giving ourselves permission to be able to
Mhm.
do that and take the time we need in order to be well and look after ourselves. And I'm delighted to hear you've got a good support system in place, to enable you to help that. And it's good that that's around us, whether that be family or friends or close loved ones that mean a lot to us, that we can lean on when we need to. But you're right. I think it's also being keenly aware of our own bodies and how our own bodies are, because the more we are aware of that, the more we'll be able to put steps and plans in place to support our well-being and if necessary our mental health as well. Um, what's next for Tanya Marwaha? I mean, you have achieved a huge amount. I mean, I stand on the shoulder of giants watching grow and develop and move, Tanya. I'm inspired. I'm actually inspired by you. So what's next for you?
Firstly, thank you. That's really lovely to hear. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Well, to be honest with you, when I saw you standing alone on that stage, giving it some, at the 0.2 conference, speaking about cultural competency, speaking about underrepresentation. And I looked around the room, and actually, the vast majority of that room was Caucasian and white, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And then I saw you absolutely telling the truth of how it was, and I will say to you, making maybe some people feel a little bit uncomfortable in terms of the truth, because sometimes the truth hurts, right? But the truth
Yeah.
has to be spoken.
Yeah.
And I just sense you're a bit of a powder keg, right? I just think you're a firecracker. You just want to get things done. So what's next for you?
I think it's always an interesting experience standing up on the stage and visibly watching people in the audience just change a little bit. But
I felt that. I absolutely felt that.
you can't have change until you have the uncomfortable conversations. So
Completely. Yeah.
I'm happy to pioneer that. So I guess what's next for me? So last year was an interesting year. It was a lot of change, kind of leaving the corporate consulting world, setting up my own consultancy, my own mental health journey as well, kind of stabilizing that. Last year, I also got diagnosed with ADHD, so I've been learning to understand what my ADHD looks like and how to manage that. So I guess last year was a year of change, and I guess coming into this year, it's really about I know what I want to do, and what that is to continue doing the work, especially around cultural competency, but also not just that well-being, but from a young person's lens, um,
Absolutely.
with that kind of diversity and inclusion intersectional approach as well. So working with organizations, businesses, individuals from that perspective, giving them the training, the resources, the awareness, the support that they need to make that change, and then continuing the conversations. I think last year was a year where I took a step back and I was just like, I'm really scared. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make people uncomfortable anymore because I don't like that feeling. But actually I think I've been able to reaffirm in myself that that is the best way to make the change. And I know that the way in which I do it is in a, I'd say, bold but kind and compassionate way. So as long as I stick to that's great. And I just really, really, really want to make sure that more voices and experiences like mine, but also those that aren't like mine but just underrepresented, are brought into the space and given the platform. And I will fight for it as long as I need to, because it's just so, so important. And I just genuinely don't think anything will truly change. I can't sit and expect things to change if I'm not going to try to make that change as well.
Absolutely. And, I stand foursquare beside you in terms of that journey, Tanya. And, through my own little bit and pieces of work that I do, both in terms of raising levels of awareness and raising levels of understanding, and delivering podcast episodes and getting the message clearly out there. I hope to further your aims and your objectives as well. You have a special place on my website. I don't know if you've been on my website, but you have a special place on my website to ensure that I'm culturally competent as I can be. But there's always room for improvement, right? There's always room for improvement. And if you're willing, and if we're willing as a society, if we're willing to make those changes, with your skill and direction and consultancy, then hopefully the world will be a better place, right?
Thank you. And the thing is also there's so much more for me to learn as well. So
Yeah.
I'm enjoying that process of learning, because I can talk about cultural competency, but not from every aspect as well. So always being open to that is really important.
Is there a book in there, Tanya?
I would love to, and I've thought a lot about it. I think there's a bit of fear. I think fear is always the thing that holds me back.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to get started, but writing is something I've loved doing in my free time since I was a child. So
Yeah.
that's on the cards. I just need to figure out how.
Yeah, I sense there's a book there. I do sense there's a book there, and I was once given a great piece of advice, because I'm in the process of writing my own story at the moment, and yeah, and there's equally some fear there as well on my part, in terms of what do I put in, what do I leave out. Want to take people on a journey with me, but I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. But like you say, in order to create change, people have to be uncomfortable, right? There has to be that level of uncomfortability. But I was given a piece of advice once, and like you said there, it's like, how do I start? Right? How do I write? And I was simply just told, write, just write, just write. It may not make any sense at the start, but as you grow in the process, it slowly but surely comes together until eventually you come up with a manuscript that shapes itself into a book.
Helpful advice. Maybe I just need to stop.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You know, they say fear is, you know, the pseudonym for fear is false evidence appearing real. So all of us, right? All of us, in terms of the work we do, got to face fear every day. You know, especially around the issues of mental health and mental health awareness. And if you're authentic and true and honest, the people that will hear will hear. The people who will see will see. The people who will understand. You know, you can, you know, all of us together chip away at that block of barrier to hopefully bring it down so that you know, services and life around mental health support can create. Do you think true mental health supports exist in the community? Do you think it's something that we ourselves need to do, Tanya, before we reach out and seek support from, you know, others? Does it start with community?
I think it definitely starts with community, but I think there's multiple factors to it. Is that it's not exhaustive to just community support, and I think also there's always a different experience everyone has with
Yeah.
community support. So I think it works really well for some people and it doesn't work as well for other people. And also acknowledging that at times it might work really well and at sometimes it might not work really well. So I think it's all about how do we ensure that support for those struggling with their mental health is as holistic as possible. And that once again doesn't lend itself to a one size fits all, which I know is really hard, but no one person's experience, no one person is the same as someone else. So it really does need to have that individualized lens to it.
Okay. Okay. And finally, Tanya, if somebody from a South Asian community was tuned into this episode this morning and was struggling with their mental health, what would you say to them?
I would say you're not alone. And I know how tough it feels. You feel like you're letting so many people down and you have to keep it all to yourself. But I promise you that it doesn't need to be like that. And there are so many incredible organizations within the South Asian community and people who are doing incredible work. One of them being Tarakki, which I work with, which supports Punjabi communities with mental health. And just know that there are safe spaces where you can share, have conversations, and be supported. And thankfully, we're getting to a place now where there are more and more mental health resources which are culturally competent and are in different languages for the South Asian community as well. So just please reach out. And it might be the case that you're seeking support and they might be telling you to lean on those who you know might not be the best people to support you at this point of time. And that's okay. But there are so many other individuals who are there.
Tanya Marwaha, thank you so much for coming on my episode today. You are inspirational. You're light in the darkness for so many people, and I think the work that you do, I think the conversations that you're having, I think the consultancy that you're delivering, I think your work that you're doing right now is so vitally important, and I wish you well. I'm honoured. I have been honoured and blessed to have you on the podcast episode to finish off this series. And what I love to finish on a high note, and I think I've finished off on the highest of notes today, Tanya, in terms of this episode. I look forward to your book.
Thank you. I look forward to your book as well.
Absolutely. Hopefully, fingers crossed, coming out in July of this year. So stay tuned for that. Yeah. Stay tuned for that. It's going to be a mixture of my own story plus what I've done to get to where I need to be in terms of my own wellness and well-being, and but also will speak directly to mental health awareness and mental health support and my own mental health story. And like you say, it's a story that goes up and down, it bobs and weaves, you know, as we experience various internal and external conditions in our life. But Tanya, I wish you absolutely well with everything that you're doing. I think you're a true inspiration to so many young people out there, not only of the South Asian community, but young people around the world. And it's been an honor to have you on my episode and my show this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much.